So the White House did a lot of warning today about a strong response if Putin invades Ukraine. Don't know exactly what that means, and what if he doesn't invade Ukraine? What then? Joining me now is Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. Senator Paul, welcome back, sir. As always, good to see you. Can I just
Thanks for having me.
Get your take, your worldview of this potential confrontation as you see it?
You know, I think it's important to listen to your adversary. You don't have to agree with your adversary, but you have to know what they want and what they're asking for. A couple things Putin has said repeatedly over time is that he doesn't want Ukraine to be part of NATO, and he doesn't want offensive weapons to be located in countries along his border. And I think those are things that we should listen to, because, for example, if we say, we must have them in NATO, that actually pushes him more towards occupying part of Ukraine. He occupies part of Georgia because he knows we can't put Georgia in NATO if he's occupying it. So I think we have to look at this on both sides and say, well, do you think it's really a good idea to keep prodding them and keep putting countries right on their border into NATO? So I think the pressure to do that actually is backfiring and making him feel more insecure and more like he's more likely to occupy part of Ukraine if he thinks we're going to put him into NATO.
But, Senator, the point I would think about is if the Ukrainians themselves, I mean, it is a democracy, if the Ukrainians themselves want to move into the Western orbit, whether it's NATO or the European Union or market-oriented capitalism because they're trying to build up their economy. I mean, if they want to do it, it seems to me Putin is stopping their self-determination. We're not the ones doing that.
Well, sure, but if he's doing it in reaction to putting them into a military alliance that he feels threatened by, I think that does have things to do with it. I think Kissinger probably had it right a few years ago when he said that Ukraine sort of has a foot in Europe and a foot in Asia, and the best thing for their country, they have to make these decisions, but the best thing would probably be to trade with both. I mean, a model of Switzerland would be much better than a model of, oh, let's get in NATO and have, you know, tens of thousands of American troops in here. The other thing, if you lived in Ukraine, then it really would be your business. But if you lived in Ukraine, I think a certain amount of federalism is good no matter what country you're in. So there are Russian-speaking dominated areas of Ukraine. Allow more independence to cities and mayors and provinces to make their own decisions, and they feel less likely to feel like, oh, we need to be part of Russia because Ukraine's not listening to us. So listening to your people and having more federalism or more local control of things is another possibility for trying to keep Ukraine together.
What would you recommend if Putin goes ahead, you know, in the worst case scenario or whatever? I don't know if he knows what his military operations are going to be. But the intel says they're moving to 175,000. What do you do, Senator, if they, in fact, invade Ukraine?
The thing is for the U.S. to participate and for the U.S. to be involved in any kind of war, it would come to the People's House, it would come to Congress, and we should have to vote on it. Shouldn't be the decision of one person, shouldn't be the decision of a president, and it would be a momentous thing. I can tell you that I think it's probably unlikely that America is going to be sending 1 million troops into the edge of Russia and fighting a war with Russia over there. I think they think that's unlikely also. They say, oh, well, we're going to sanction them or do things with NATO. We've got thousands of sanctions on Russia, and I see no evidence they've changed any behavior. I think the opposite would be of the 1,000 sanctions we have on Russia, that if we talk about what are the things we can cooperate on, what are some of the ways we could actually lessen sanctions in order to have better relations. So we're very good at putting sanctions on, but I've yet to see any sanctions we take off or any way we use them as leverage to get better behavior. So I'm for more diplomacy on this. I still think there's a way out that wouldn't involve war.
Well, actually, I hope you're right. Actually, I don't think there's any chance that we would actually go to war. Sanctions may be another a completely different matter. But, Senator, another point is, why didn't Biden help the U.S. Oil and gas industry instead of helping Russia's? And among other things, if we go back, you know, if he would stop attacking our fossil fuel industry, and we produced more fossil fuels, which we're capable of doing, frankly, in a clean way, that would lower the world price, I think, more supply in the market. That hurts Russia. That hurts Russia a lot.
Well, I think he's inconsistent in opposing pipelines here and being for pipelines overseas.
Yeah.
But I would say that I think people misrepresent the Nord Stream 2. It's already completed. It's a fait accompli. It's not like, oh, we're going to put sanctions on it and it's going to go away. The pipeline is completed, and I think that ship has sailed. But I'm for more commerce. I'm for Russia selling more stuff to Europe and Europe buying more stuff from Russia. The more we are interconnected, the less likely we are to fight. So I'm for more oil coming out of Texas, more oil coming out of North Dakota. But I actually don't mind if there's more commerce between Russia and between Europe. I think it's much less likely that they go to war if we're more intertwined by trade.
Okay, I want to just switch gears. There's a wonderful quote from our friend Elon Musk about saving America and killing the bill. I want to come back to that, and it has something to do with energy. Take a listen, Senator, to what Mr. Musk said. I think it was yesterday.
Honestly, it might be better if the bill doesn't pass, because we've spent so much money. It's like the federal budget deficit is insane. Honestly, I would just can this whole bill. Don't pass it. That's my recommendation. Do we need support for gas stations? We don't. So there's no need for this for support for a charging network. I would delete it. Delete. In general, we should just if we don't cut government spending, something really bad's going to happen. This is crazy. Our spending is so far in excess of revenue. It's insane.
He kind of sounds like your kind of guy, Senator. He said delete, can the whole bill. The federal government shouldn't pay for these electric gas stations. What do you make of that? And are you surprised to hear Musk say that?
You know, I don't know him well, but he's exactly right. I mean, the debt is going to kill us. The debt is an impending bomb for the economy. It's causing the inflation we have now, but it's going to get worse if we add more debt to it. As far as electrical charging stations, they should develop as the market for electric cars develop. They'll develop in a spontaneous market-ordered way, but you don't want the government building them. You remember what Friedman said about only, if you gave the federal government the Sahara Desert, there'd be a shortage of sand within weeks. The federal government's terrible at running things. They'll be terrible at running electric charging stations. We should look at it. Everybody's saying the government we need to be in the semiconductor business. Well, just yesterday, Texas announced $17 billion investment. That's the way it ought to work. Let's encourage semiconductors to be built in our country, but let's not give them money. Let's reduce their taxes and say, come to our country. It's a wonderful place. But let's don't build all this stuff ourselves or have government do it, because they'll inevitably screw it up.
Of course, I totally agree with you. This may or may not surprise you, the last point. One guy who completely opposed subsidies for industries, including the semiconductor industry, he did not want subsidies, was my former boss, Donald Trump. I don't know if that's
the way. It's the best. Look, we could fix so many problems. We do want more like the supply chain for semiconductors and also for drugs to be in our country. Let's do it by reducing their taxes. That way we don't pick who the winners are. You have to make a profit to pay less taxes, but let's reduce the taxes on people who want to make semiconductors and make their antibiotics and their drugs here. We could be the king of all of these things again. Look, Puerto Rico used to be a big place for pharmaceuticals. Then we took away the tax advantage, and guess what? They're no longer have much of a production chain there.
Senator Rand, you're preaching to the choir. I can only say amen. Thanks for coming back on the show.
Thanks,
Hope to see you soon.